Welcome to the SoLoMo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is November 7th, 2012, and this is episode number 44.
In this episode, we're going to discuss the 2012 presidential election, Instagram's new web profiles, Foursquare's business ratings, how to get creative with your photography, and much more. How you doing, Corey?
I am doing well. How's it going, Adam?
I'm doing all right. We just decided to up the difficulty level on the podcast this week, huh?
There you go. We are taking this podcast international.
International in a big way, and mobile. It's all social, local, and mobile, kind of in a whole different way.
There you go. Rolled into one. You're gonna have to you'll have to tweet this entire episode. That way, it'll be social, local, and mobile all at once.
Yeah, and what we're referring to is Corey is in the usual spot over there in the Silicon Valley, and I am actually recording this from an iPad at family's place in the Middle East. So I'm specifically in Lebanon, and I'm going to be over here for a little while. I'm doing a little bit of stuff professionally and personally with family. So we thought, look, at least we'll try the first time. If I flub while we try to do it the very first time, then, Corey will take it and he'll find a way to keep the ball rolling on his end until I can get back over there. But we thought we'd test it. And so I'm literally on Wi-Fi with my iPad right now, recording the show, looking at the show notes on the iPad and everything. So, podcast expert level plus 10 here.
There you go. Achievement unlocked. I like it.
Exactly.
Nice.
Any announcements on your end, Corey?
No big announcements, so we can dive right into our first topic, which is the presidential election. The United States has... Oh, what's that?
I said, everybody over here was actually excitedly watching. We were up, watching that during, I think it was our morning time was all the stuff talking about the election over there. So it was amazing to see how people were reacting over here from it as well. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening on the social web this time for the election.
Yeah, definitely. So quick recap, the United States has elected Barack Obama yet again to continue his presidency. And that prediction was probably best predicted by Nate Silver, who blogs at 538, part of the New York Times blogging. And he sort of made a big name for himself this election season by successfully predicting not only the election, but he predicted every single state. So there were plenty of pundits out there, Mitt Romney's going to win this state, Barack's going to win that state. Nate Silver used a variety of data analysis techniques to not only successfully predict every state, but oftentimes successfully predict down to the 0.1% what the final vote tallies were going to be. So, if a state ended up 49.1% for Barack Obama, he actually predicted 49.1%. It was incredibly impressive, and I think a lot of people took note because he really, put big data on the map. So, really interesting. Were you following along with that, Adam? Did you have any, Nate Silver thoughts and feelings?
No, I actually hadn't heard of it. How accurate was he?
Like I said, he was 50 for 50. He was exact percentiles on a lot of the states. So, really just showed what you can do. And what was interesting is, we talk a little bit about big data, but what he did is looked at polling data, but then adjusted the polling data appropriately. So he looked at past accuracy of each of the polling results. So, he was able to take data, even if it wasn't 100% accurate, he was able to kind of handicap that data appropriately. So, if somebody puts out a lot of polling data, but they tend to be off by 5%, he would put both of those numbers in. So he had the polling results, and then he said, okay, well, there's a 5% chance of error. And then, kind of numbers crunched all of these different points of data and, ended up with what turned out to be a very accurate model for how the results were going to end up. Even, again, blowing away a lot of the professional political pundits that kind of follow this thing and were saying, oh, well, this is the polling data, but we know that, typically in this state that happens and we're going to see shifts and all this. And he said, we're going to ignore a lot of that. We're going to look at the raw data. We're going to examine the numbers. And I think, proved that was a viable way of crunching a lot of this data and really coming up with actionable insight and predicting to a very high degree of accuracy the results of the election.
Now, what were the data points he was using? Was he using any sort of any social data or anything as well in his number crunching?
I'm not sure. I think he was using primarily polling data, and I think like I said, adjusting it. I don't think that he was. Because I guess the idea is that sometimes the social data can kind of throw things off. It's selective bias. The people that are talking about it are more of the extreme viewpoints. And so, it's trying to take some of that out. It's trying to use random sampling, that sort of thing. But overall, I thought it was very interesting to see some of the successful big data results coming out of that.
For the listeners, define big data just a little bit so they can hear how they might think about paying attention to something like this.
Big data is tricky. It's essentially the wrong definition is a lot of data, and it's really a combination of a lot of data that's unstructured or not kind of neatly organized. So having a massive spreadsheet but having it really well organized, that's not necessarily big data. That's just a lot of data. What big data is bringing together a lot of different types of data and finding a way of making it all make sense together. So again, this idea of having all of these different polling techniques and all of these different polling companies who are using different ways of polling, different statistical errors, different methods, different reporting, different frequencies, all of these different types of data, and then finding a way of mashing it together and accounting for those differences when you come up with your final result. So, there is a difference between a lot of data and big data. In this case, big data means a lot of data that's also, structured and has differences between the groups of data that you have to account for, which makes it a very challenging process. It's not like, saying, okay, well, there's a lot of data that I have to crunch. It's actually saying you have to come up with ways of making data that doesn't necessarily want to talk to itself naturally. You have to find ways of adjusting and bringing the two together.
And so it's more about taking it from kind of, it can be a lot of data, but a lot of data from disparate sources that are scattered about and correlating it in intelligent ways.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of big numbers, another impressive thing that came out of the election was the world's most socially shared photo. So following the victory, Barack Obama's campaign posted a photo of Barack and Michelle kind of hugging each other and celebrating in victory. And they posted this both to Twitter and to Facebook. And it had a simple caption. It just said 4 more years. And, I think they really just captured the emotion of what a lot of people were feeling. And so a lot of people responded positively to this. As of right now, I'm going to pull the live numbers because it continues to go up. But on Facebook alone, the photo has more than 3.8 million likes, 537,000 shares, and 188,000 comments. So, Facebook has come out and said, look, this is the most shared photo, and it's really impressive. 3.8 million in less than a day. It shows that the power of Facebook, people liked this, and because it was so liked, it got more liked and more liked and more liked, and it just kind of built upon itself. And everyone used this as a way of, kind of stamping their own profile and saying, yes, I have liked this, and I'm, giving this my own little seal of approval. So really interesting numbers coming off of that.
And like you said, 500,000 shares. I mean, that extends the reach, beyond the many, many folks, probably likely over 1 million folks that are following Barack Obama on Facebook, and continue to extend the reach. And it would be interesting to see the other dynamics that play into it, where somebody likes something, it ends up appearing in a friend's feed by the dynamics that Facebook provides on their network and so on to kind of extend the reach of that particular piece of content. So really interesting. Of course, obviously, it's not like the average is going to be able to take advantage of something like this per se, because this is very kind of an emotionally charged event-based content here, and something that happens only once every 4 years, obviously, but still interesting nonetheless.
Looking at over on Twitter, the same photo shared on Twitter had 773,000 retweets and 272,000 favorites. So even on Twitter, people wanted to share this. They wanted to kind of extend it. And what's interesting, I think, is 773,000 retweets. It's not like this was a photo that people had to share, in order to get it out. People were already seeing this photo, but I think everyone wanted to retweet it as a way of kind of adding it to their own profile, making it part of their own identity, which is interesting. I think, again, it's the same reason people liked it on Facebook. You're sort of giving people the tools that they need to identify themselves and to build up their own personal profile. And just shows that, with the right message and the right audience, that can work really well. So we're seeing record numbers here. It'll be interesting to see what the next thing that comes along and gets more than this, because I think the previous record holder was Justin Bieber, who was thankfully knocked off the throne by something a little more important. But definitely strong numbers and an interesting dynamic of sharing and, not just sharing to make sure everyone sees it, but sharing in order to identify yourself with a cause.
So speaking of additional Facebook numbers related to the election, there's some even more juicy stuff here, huh?
Yeah, so Facebook actually did something really interesting. And not only Facebook, Foursquare, a lot of the geolocation services were really trying to capture data around the voting, around the election, and display that in an interesting way. But Facebook created what they called it's part of their Facebook Stories series, and it was called America Votes 2012. And essentially, when you voted, you could go onto Facebook and click a button that said, I voted, and it added to an overall tally of the number of people that had voted and shared that statistic on Facebook. And their goal was, help build the idea of everyone voting. So if you voted, you'd share that, your friends would see it, it would hopefully motivate them to vote as well. And all told, they got 9,682,000 people to click on this I voted button. And out of that, they came up with some pretty interesting data. So one thing that really stood out to me is the fact that the male-female split was so significant. So of those 9+ million people, 3.2 million of the users were male and 6.3 million users were female. So nearly twice as many females as males clicked the I voted button. I'm not sure how that correlates to the actual voting data, but I'd got to imagine the male-female voting ratio is much closer to 50-50. So I thought it was interesting that females primarily went to Facebook and used Facebook as a way of saying, yes, I voted, I'm proud of that fact, I want to share that fact with others. I thought that was really interesting. Is that something that you would have expected, Adam?
I think I would expect it, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if even the voting data probably skewed a little bit in one direction. I don't know what the actual voting data would be as of this moment, but I really wouldn't be surprised if it wouldn't be 50-50, and maybe it actually skewed a little bit more in one direction or the other. It would just be obviously speculating a bit, just saying on the female side. But I wouldn't be surprised if there would be some truth in these numbers in regards to which direction they're skewing a bit.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's not 50-50, but I think the idea of being 66-33, that's a pretty heavy skew. So interesting, just the difference between actual data and what people were sort of compelled to share on Facebook. The other thing they talked about is votes per hour. So you could actually look at Pacific or Eastern or Central and look at the time that people were reporting. And I thought there was an interesting trend. So looking at Pacific time, the main spike in votes actually happened right around noon, which I thought was interesting. I would have expected it to either be early in the morning or kind of the after work 6 o'clock time. But it looked like in terms of votes per hour, the spike was around noon. So it seems to be that people either A, went and voted during lunch, or B, that was sort of the time where they were checking Facebook and they, saw the opportunity to click this I voted button and share, because it's not like you had to do it the exact moment you voted. So you could click it and signify that at any time. But interesting. I think we talk a lot about what's the opportune time to share data and what do you want to put something out there so that others will respond to it. And it seems like this data indicates lunchtime is often a good time when people are kind of checking Facebook, they're looking around, they're in more of a browsing mood, and they're more willing to kind of share with their friends and with their own communities.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
All right. So overall, another trend that we saw was Instagram going mainstream. A huge spike in Instagram usage throughout the election. Both during the election day, a lot of people were sharing their I voted sticker or a picture of their ballot, which oftentimes in some states was even illegal, but it didn't stop people from, not maliciously, but just taking a picture of their ballot and saying, hey, I'm voting, and probably not realizing that that's actually not something you can legally do. But leaving that aside, I thought it was really interesting, just the sheer number of Instagram photos, in my feed at least, that I saw friends voting, friends talking about voting, friends, taking pictures of the announcements on TV. I think Instagram really kind of proved itself during the election as the go-to source for, hey, I want to share this moment that I'm in, whether that was voting or whether that was following President Obama's victory. It was sort of the first thing people reached for as a way of sharing that moment that they were in. And I thought that's really interesting. It almost felt like it had more momentum than Twitter. It felt like, Twitter obviously had more content overall, but it felt like people were really excited about finding a cool way of sharing that excitement and that emotion through Instagram. Did you have some of that same experience, Adam?
Instagram was the one network, because I was over here. We voted early because we were traveling, and we've been here for a couple days. And so I didn't actually get a chance to look at Instagram. I was looking at Twitter and Facebook and seeing what was going on there. But we covered this in an earlier episode earlier this year. I almost felt like saying, this was about a year ago, but we've been doing the show for just under a year, and it wasn't too long after where we talked about how Obama this year had taken Instagram as a new channel that didn't exist during the previous election, and that there was some kind of what do you want to say? What's the right way? There was some affirmation of Instagram as a platform for brands and celebrities and such, because the politicians this year, even Romney as well, were both adopting Instagram as a new channel for this. And so this shows the steam that it gained, that people were not just interested in connecting with friends, but also with, again, public figures and celebrities and such as well. And it became very, very, very popular during this particular election. The thing that I find interesting, actually, as we talk about Twitter and this particular very popular photo that you mentioned on Facebook, is that this photo was likely shared on Instagram as well, and you can tell me if you saw it over there, Corey. But that the Obama team is actually sharing this photo separately on each of the networks, it seems. So rather than say, a lot of people depend on taking and cross-promoting or cross-posting a photo across many networks from one. So theoretically, you could post this with Instagram and have it go to Twitter and to Facebook. But you can usually tell when those images have been cross-promoted. When you look at, say, Facebook, it'll reference that it was posted on Instagram, for instance. And it seems that their team has been very particular about making sure that the images and the content is shared uniquely in each of the channels that they're sharing it in, regardless of whether or not it alters it. I mean, really, the same effect would happen if they were to cross-promote it across the other networks. But like, for instance, with Facebook in particular, when you post directly to Facebook rather than cross-promoting, it actually helps it gain a little bit more organic visibility through the Facebook EdgeRank and stuff. And so I just thought that was an interesting thing that I noticed. Can you confirm whether or not the same photo was shared on Instagram?
I can, and interestingly enough, it was not shared on Instagram. So there were a couple of photos that got cross-posted, but this one in particular was only Facebook and Twitter, which is interesting. I wouldn't read too much into that. I think that they they were kind of posting things everywhere they could and sharing. But the photo that happened to go, kind of hyper viral on Twitter and Facebook was not shared on Instagram. There was another photo that was cross-posted, so it's kind of interesting to compare the data on it. So there was a photo of Barack, and he's sort of in this confetti that's falling down. And on Facebook, it got 1.4 million likes, nearly 1.5 million likes. And on Instagram, it actually got 172,000 likes, which, shy of the number that it got on Facebook, but still a very respectable number. And especially when you compare it to the total number of followers. So Barack Obama on Facebook has 32 million fans, which generated 1.2 or 1.5 million likes on that photo. On Instagram, he has 1,600,000. So, a significant margin lower, and still had 172,000 likes. So in both cases, in Facebook's case, 32 million kind of toned itself down to 1.5, so it's basically what would that be, 3 out of every 60, so 1 out of every 20 people liked that picture. On Instagram, it was 1 out of every 10, so a more engaged audience on Instagram, which kind of interesting. I don't know if those numbers would hold true if he happened to have 30 million followers on Instagram. I don't know if you would generate the same number of likes on that photo, but again, kind of interesting that they are picking specific photos and cross-posting some and not cross-posting others, and just looking at the response that gets when it is posted to these various channels.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think there's a need to say read too much into it, but I do think it's something just to kind of pay attention to and note that I don't think that the folks dealing with the social media for the Obama campaign kind of shortcut things that often. I think that they do it, and they pay attention to what they're doing, and they're very deliberate on how they do it. So it's just kind of something to note. Shortcutting isn't always the easiest way of dealing with it.
Jumping into our next topic for the day, because I'm actually the reason I was able to look up Barack Obama's Instagram status and Instagram like numbers is that Instagram recently launched public online pages for profiles. So now, instead of only being able to view Instagram photos inside of the Instagram application, you can go to, for instance, Instagram.com/Barack Obama to view all of Barack Obama's recent Instagram photos, including being able to click on each one of the photos to view like data and comments and all of the other data that goes along with an Instagram photo. And previously, this was technically available. You could see an individual photo online, but there was no central profile. And so this is the first time that you've kind of taken the Instagram experience out of Instagram and put it on the web. And I think it's really interesting, in large part because it's heavily influenced by Facebook. So Instagram now being a part of Facebook, you can really see some of those design language coming through in the overall profile layout for these Instagram profiles. It's got kind of a cover photo, and it's got a profile picture, and there's follow buttons. A lot of interesting things going on inside of the public profiles that they recently rolled out. So, Adam, did you get a chance to check this out? What's your thoughts on the Instagram public profiles?
Yeah, these are beautiful. Actually, the way that they designed it, they're very kind of at first glance Facebook-esque. With the current cover photo you can put on the top and so on, but they've really made it a much more kind of visually engaging experience with this sort of grid on top and images rotating around a bit without being gaudy or kind of distracting. I think it's actually really beautiful. A couple of the things that I also noticed in addition to that was, there's been a number of networks over the last few years that have been born of mobile. And so Instagram is definitely born of mobile and has focused on mobile, and in fact has had very, very little that you could do with it on the web versus strictly on your mobile device. And they still have relegated with this update, like for instance, you cannot upload a photo other than on your mobile device. You can't just upload it to the web now. They haven't, this is profiles, but this is not an interface that allows you to upload photos from your SLR, for instance, to Instagram. Although I know people have dealt with workarounds and stuff to do that instead of kind of staying true to the original premise of the network and doing it all from their mobile device. But we've seen a number of mobile first networks turn around and blossom and create a web presence based off of it, right? So we had Foursquare that previously had kind of a little bit of a stripped experience online, and they launched their Explorer with a number of other things with their website earlier this year. Food Spotting did that recently as well. And so those guys have been predominantly mobile and have now really made a bigger push onto the web. And one of the things that I hear talked about often from my side is, this whole mobile first preference, and how you design your experience, and that mobile is going to be the big thing. And then for whatever reason, they make it sound like the desktop experience or the full browser experience is somehow going to be greatly diminished to the point where it really is secondary in comparison. I think what we're seeing is people kind of proving that it's not necessarily second in comparison. It's just that these particular experiences have blossomed initially from mobile-generated content, like, for instance, location-based content with Foursquare and with Food Spotting, where it wouldn't make sense for that to come from a desktop experience first. But there is an appropriate way to take that information and package it for the desktop experience and make it available to those folks who would likely want to use it via, a desktop experience. So this, for instance, the experience you'd have with Instagram is to actually follow and engage with the content of others and consume the content, right? To look at the photos. Looking at photos on a mobile device is great and pretty, but looking at these like in their full glory on a desktop device, or even right now I'm looking at it on my iPad, it's so much nicer to have it at this full size. And so I think packaging it appropriately, depending on the experience that you want to have, is an important thing to pay attention to. And I think these guys are all proving, these mobile first platforms and companies are all proving that they need to have a nice presence, a great presence of some kind on the browsers that could be available to all the larger format devices, including desktops and laptops.
So looking specifically at the new Instagram profiles and, what would a company need to do to take advantage of this? Or what are some things that brands and companies should be considering? I think the first would be that I think this is going to legitimize Instagram for a lot of brands that were maybe a little cautious about it before. So when it only lives inside of this mobile experience, for brands, that's a little bit of an uncomfortable space. You're not quite sure how to promote it. How do you go about finding new fans for this? How do you get your existing audience into Instagram? I think there were a couple of brands that did it well, but a lot of companies were sort of afraid to dive in because they're thinking to themselves, this is unlike other things that I've done before. I'm not quite sure how to drive an audience. But now you can link to your Instagram profile on the web, and if people are logged in using their Instagram credentials, they can actually like you directly from that web profile. So I think it's a definite positive step for a lot of brands that weren't quite sure how to get their foot in the door. And now they can say, hey, check us out. You can like us on this website here, which you can link to from Facebook and from Twitter and from all these traditional places. Like us through our Instagram web profile. And then when you next load up the Instagram mobile app, we'll already be there. You'll already be following us. What else would you think companies should be considering for this announcement, Adam?
I think what you're saying is pretty much spot on. Now you can take this and you can link you yourself. Now it's much easier to find individual photos. Previously, you could get to a page that had an individual photo, but you would in a way have to share it first someplace and then go find the URL. If you were cross-promoting it, say on Facebook or on Twitter, now you can go into individual photos. So if for whatever reason you want to link to that photo, maybe provide it to media or press, it it could be used as a bank of images that other folks could also use in, say, covering your product or company or brand. I think it now makes it also much easier, like you said, just to simply link directly to the profile. So the same way that you would do it online to pretty much any other online platform, and the folks that were very, very savvy on Instagram would be, it would be easy for them to search for the user and say, okay, I'll follow them directly on their mobile device. But doing it, but for folks who are kind of not the early adopters or maybe not as savvy with the mobile application, this makes it much easier for them. Just like you said, I think it's going to really expand the user base for Instagram. I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't think that they have it available yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see widgets and other sorts of things that allow you to embed parts of your profile. I think they already do have, I might be wrong, a follow button that you can embed elsewhere to follow the Instagram profile. Do you know of anything like that, Corey?
No button that I've seen officially. I've seen some unofficial workarounds, some of the kind of third-party services that were doing what Instagram is now doing themselves had created a button, but it was really a back-end kind of unsupported feature. Instagram has not yet rolled that out, but I do think that that would make a lot of sense, especially, again, considering that they're taking a lot of cues from Facebook, and Facebook has always really promoted that, take your like button, put it elsewhere, get people to like your Facebook page from all of these other places. It seems to make a lot of sense that you would also say, hey, get people to like your Instagram account from all of these other places as well. So definitely something to keep an eye out, and definitely something that I would not be surprised to see get added in the near future.
Yep.
So one other thing that's interesting is, unlike a lot of the profiles that are out right now, and I'm thinking specifically of Google+, Facebook, Twitter, the Instagram profile takes a little bit of control away from the brand in terms of what shows up around the top area of your profile. So with Google+, with Facebook, with Twitter, you're allowed to pick your own header image or your own cover photo. In Instagram's case, they've actually created an algorithm that just automatically cycles through your latest photos. And I think this is interesting because, again, it takes a little bit of that control away. Ideally, all the photos that you're sharing, you wouldn't mind them appearing in your header image, but it goes to, highlight the fact that you really want to have a cohesive image strategy. I think if every single one of your images is totally different, you're using different lighting and different formatting and different, everything, it's going to look a little weird when everything's placed next to one another in this header area. So, I think we'll start to see maybe a behavior emerge where people try to, I'm not saying every photo has to be identical to one another, but you'll see styles kind of emerge and people trying to keep their style consistent so that when all of these photos are displayed next to one another, it makes more sense.
It's part of a cohesive brand and part of a cohesive story. Like when you definitely look at the Barack Obama profile, you see this story kind of emerging. And I think whereas, on Facebook and other networks, sometimes people are a little bit off the hip with what they share, that Instagram, because there's so much concentration on the images, and because now, like you were saying, when you come to the profile, you see them all together as this kind of cohesive package, that you might, think a little bit more about how it is presented, because that is as how it's presented as a whole, and whether you're sharing stuff that is incredible. I mean, we've already talked about the fact that you don't have to be perfect in every single photo that you share per se, but when people come down to this profile, if you're urging them to, and you're persuading them to, when they come here, the content here should look kind of engaging for what they would want, right? Or why would they want to follow you? I hope we don't find a lot of people who are starting to do more of the captioning of photos, where they're putting their caption on top of the photos to make it funny or maybe advertise a little bit more. I think people should still stay far away from that if at all possible. But yeah, I agree with you. I think part of this, looking at it as a whole, makes a considerable difference now than, say, looking at it within your Instagram feed one at a time.
Again, I think the difference is, like you just said, it used to be you'd see each image one at a time, and as you were scrolling through this mobile feed, you didn't really see all of the photos next to one another. You could if you viewed somebody's profile page, but that wasn't the way that you were typically viewing Instagram. But when it's viewed in this web profile, that is really the highlight. It's all of the images seen and viewed at once. And we'll actually link to the Instagram announcement blog post. And I think they did really well at capturing 3 examples that kind of show what we're talking about here in the sense of having a profile that feels very cohesive, because they featured 3 different ones, one of which is kind of food related, one of which is travel related, and one of which is fashion related. And when you look at it, you get the sense that it's a cohesive story. It's a style, it's a type of content. And, you know, if you were into food and you saw this, you'd know instantly, all right, this is the type of account that I want to follow. And so I think narrowing your focus a little bit is going to help others when they discover you really have that initial feeling of, yes, this is an account I want to follow. I want to see photos like this. Versus if they show up there and there's all different types of content and all different types of features and things that you're highlighting, they're not quite sure what they're even signing up for. And so maybe users are going to be a little less likely to follow you if you're not telling that cohesive story.
And maybe the first thing for folks to do, part of our suggestion to our listeners is to go right now and take a look at Instagram.com/ whatever your username is. If you are an Instagram user, use it for your brand, and just take a look at how does everything look together. Print it out or put it onto a screen and kind of look at things a little bit with your team and see how everything feels. What kind of brand association would people have if they were to look at this profile? And are there any adjustments that you might want to make with the sort of content that you share, the images that you share on Instagram, now that you know that it could be very well presented as one page to folks who are going to this web profile? And likely in the future, I think Corey and I both agree that likely in the future there'll be some widgets and things that will also allow you to extend the body of content that you have on Instagram, whether it be just a follow button, or I would say probably likely a way to embed maybe even this interactive header image that's here, or a bunch of the most recent photos that you have onto someplace else on the web, like your blog or your web page.
I think the idea of checking it out definitely makes a lot of sense. One thing to keep in mind is a business profile is probably going to be a little different than a personal profile. So when I look at my own Instagram account, I'm sort of all over the place. But I think that, for me, I'm just sharing it with friends. And so I'm not necessarily trying to tell a story. If I was doing that account for a brand or for a specific company, I would probably try to work in a little bit more of a cohesive story and a cohesive look and feel. Again, that makes sense for somebody who's coming across it for the first time in a way that I wouldn't be concerned about for a personal profile. So you got to kind of look at it through the lens of, I'm putting my brand story out there. What do I want that brand story to look like? And it's probably going to be different than what maybe your personal Instagram profile would look like. So I think that's something important to keep in mind.
Yep.
All right, Adam. It's that time again. The lightning round time.
From across the world, the lightning will go all the way around the world, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of it's actually pretty good so far in regards to, I expected to have a big delay with Skype and all that stuff and be having these big long pauses between you and I talking because the waiting for the signal to reach me on my side of the world, but I think it's been good so far. So let's see how accurate we can be with the timekeeping on the lightning round. I know I'm always up against the final 10 seconds of the clock.
Yeah, and since we won't have the webcam, you're going to have to keep track of your own 60 seconds. I will have the buzzer go off, but I will have no way of giving you the 10 and 5 second warning. So keep track of things, and we'll see how this goes.
All right,
so first up, the Google Wallet card. Do you want to take this one, or you want me to?
Sure, I'll take this one.
All right, 60 seconds on the clock, Adam. Ready and go.
All right, so Google has announced that they will be releasing a what they're calling a Google Wallet card, and what it is Google Wallet is a way to use your phone and NFC, which we've talked about in the past, to make payments to vendors and such. And not everybody is supporting NFC, and so Google has kind of made this thing in the middle, which is potentially which is issuing a card that you can tie your Google Wallet account to, and your Google Wallet account can tie to one or more other funding sources. So for different credit cards or debit cards and things like that. And so essentially you're using one card to rule them all, which is a little bit funny. I think that this really is a stopgap to get people to adopt Google as a payment kind of gateway until NFC takes off, or whatever the technology is that ends up being most used.
All right. Well done. Right on the 60-second buzzer. All right. 60 seconds on the clock for the response. Ready and go. So I agree. I think this is interesting. It definitely could help the adoption of Google Wallet. One thing that's super interesting is it actually reminds me a lot of another product that's already out in the market called the Wallaby card. So Wallaby is it's a single credit card that you then connect to all of your other cards. And what it was trying to do is sort of funnel things through the most appropriate. So there's certain cards that would give you a better rebate on gas, or a certain card that would give you a better rebate when you're out shopping at a, mall. And so it would funnel each one of those purchases through the appropriate card. That's kind of what Google could do. So they could have this single card and say, okay, when you buy gas, put that through the Costco gas card. When you're out grocery shopping, put that on a different card, and kind of optimize your finance for you. So I think that part of it is interesting, and it will be interesting to see if this helps adoption, though it still faces the challenge of being Android only. All right, 60 seconds back on the clock for the next story here. Ready and go. So this is an interesting one because I feel like every week we are now broadcasting the back and forth fight between Foursquare and Yelp. The latest blow was Foursquare, which added ratings to its application. So now when you're inside of Foursquare and you're browsing around and you're looking for a restaurant, they've actually come up with a rating system. But what's interesting is, unlike Yelp, which is a direct result of people, going to Yelp and rating, Foursquare is trying to come up with the rating for you. So they're looking at things like check-in data and how many people like those check-ins and how many photos get posted and how many people, check in repeatedly to a place. And from that, they're essentially creating an algorithm that comes up with their own Foursquare score. I think it could potentially be a viable alternative to Yelp. It sort of avoids some of the biases that Yelp has built into its own number. So it'll be interesting to see what people's response is to this if they start to pay attention. All right, Adam, 60 seconds on the clock. What do you think about the Foursquare ratings and reviews? Ready and go.
Yeah, I think this is really, really interesting. Like you were saying, it could become a viable alternative. I think it kind of abstracts out the whole really linear, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star thing, which is kind of, it's very one-dimensional. It doesn't have a lot of additional meat on the bone to it. People can kind of game it more than they can other systems. So even something like an Amazon, when you're just relying on a 4 or 5-star, 3-star sort of thing. And so I think this really means now for folks who are active on Foursquare, who haven't been as active on Foursquare, to pay a little bit more of attention to how engaged they are on Foursquare, or how engaged they try to incentivize their audiences, their customers, to be on Foursquare, so that way they can bump those different signals that are starting to factor into their ratings.
Yes, indeed. All right, you saved the audience with a couple of seconds to go from hearing the lightning round sound. So, 60 seconds back on the clock. Let's dive into topic number 3. Ready and go. So again, with the stories that are sort of coming back week over week, we now see that Facebook is testing what they're calling the Pages feed. And this is kind of in response to something we talked about previously, which is Pages essentially complaining that, hey, people have come, they've liked my page, and now they're not seeing my updates anymore. So what Facebook is testing is a Pages feed that brings all of those page updates into a single area. I think the challenge with this is it's still asking people to then click on that Pages feed, and I don't think that that's a behavior people are going to adopt. I said that before when, brands were trying to motivate people to add them to a special list and then check that list. I just don't think people, Power users, yes, but the normal Facebook user is not going to think, oh, I'm looking at my wall, but I should really click this button to customize what I'm seeing. They're really relying on Facebook to source this data. And so I think, page feed kind of is a response, but I don't think it's a response that'll work. All right, Adam, 60 seconds on the clock. What's your take on the Facebook Pages feed?
So I think this is, again, we referred to kind of the stories, and I don't know if it was the last episode or the one before where folks were freaking out about whether or not people were following their page or seeing their page content. I think it really is about time telling whether or not folks actually adopt this sort of behavior to follow the pages. I think the page owners have a little bit too much confidence in the fact that people want to see every last thing that they share. I also don't know if those feeds are time-based or top story-based, meaning that they still rely on the edge rank, which would matter quite a bit. I think that we might see a differentiation. Instead of people liking, maybe when they like, they also decide whether or not they want to have that page be a part of their feed that they follow in their pages. Time will tell. We'll see. It's still a little bit of a Band-Aid for the overall situation that we've been talking about in the past.
Well done. You're doing well for not being able to actually see the timer, so I will give you credit for that. All right, one more to close out the lightning round. 60 seconds back on the clock. Ready and go. So this is the introduction of Waze advertising, W-A-Z-E. And Waze is a company that we have talked about previously. We had one of the representatives from Waze on as a guest of the show. I'm a big fan of this, and I think it's interesting that they're now getting into kind of self-advertising where brands can get on, they can create their own ad programs and integrate themselves into the Waze experience. I think that there's a lot of advantages to advertising on a platform like Waze that has already done the work to build up really loyal users. When people are using the Waze application, they trust it, they like the data, they like the interaction, and so I think they're more receptive to something like a well-placed ad. If you're a restaurant, if you're basically anything that people are going to drive by and you want to bring them in, check this out. I think this is a good opportunity and something that I really see potential for again, any business that has drive-by customers. All right, Adam, 60 seconds on the clock to close out the lightning round. What's your take on the Waze ad platform? Go.
Yeah, at first I thought it was potentially a big distraction for drivers, but the more I read into it, I think that this is actually a really viable way for local businesses or local businesses to kind of get noticed. And I think really it's about the pricing and seeing if the pricing is right for you. They have kind of a flexible pricing model. But Waze has been growing quite a bit. There was an article recently that showed in July that they reported having over 20 million users, and half of those users coming in like the last, few months or 6 months. And so between also July and now, they've increased even much more. I don't know what the actual number is. I just know that I've been seeing a lot more people who have been using it and following and those sorts of things. I think this is a super viable way of gaining awareness for your location and showing people that there are specials that you have available, whatever the case may be, and just paying attention to it differently than you might on, say, a Foursquare or a Yelp.
All right, so that closes out the lightning round. Let's move on real quick to the action item of the day. And considering we talked quite a bit about photography, I think this is pretty appropriate for this episode. So this is a blog post that was put out by Fat Mum Slim, a blogger that we've covered a couple times in the past, mostly because she's really heavily involved in the idea of photo a day. She puts out these photo a day topics, and tens and even hundreds of thousands of people all around the world have subscribed to these photo a days and then share their own content. And so she put out a blog post called 7 Ways to Be More Creative with Photo a Day. But I think that the tip she shares applies to photography in general. I think that she has a lot of good insight, and this is someone who has a lot of experience with getting people motivated about taking better photos. And so I thought we'd run through a couple of these and just share them with the audience, because I think they're great tips for how to improve your own images and your own photography style when, maybe you're just getting up and running and you're trying to figure out how to take your photography to the next level. So the first thing she shares, and this is specific to the photo a day, but I think you can extract it out, is checked the prompt early. And so in this case, she's saying, check what you're supposed to be taking a photo of for photo a day. But I think it speaks in broader terms to the idea of plan ahead. Don't head out there and suddenly see something and realize, I got to take a quick picture of it and just snap a single picture and call it a day. I think, plan out what types of content you want to take photos of. How do you want to go about getting those photos? Does it make sense to, set up a little photo shoot inside of a building? Do you go outside to do it? Do you need, somebody to be in the shoot? Do you hire a model? Do you use employees? There's a lot of planning that goes into getting a good photo. And so I think if you put a little bit of that work into planning it out and making sure that you're thinking through the images, you're going to see a lot better results compared to if you just, bring your camera with you and try to get hit with inspiration as you're walking around. There's certainly opportunities to, let inspiration run wild, but at the same time, you should balance that with really planning out a lot of the photos that you're going to take and share. The next tip she shares is take 3 photos of the same thing. And I think this is another great tip. So a lot of people, again, they'll take a single quick photo. They'll say, all right, I got that, let me share it out. But if you really challenge yourself to look at things from different angles, try a few different techniques, get low, take it from below looking up, and then, step back a little bit and get more of the scene in the picture, and then move real close and, get some of the texture of whatever you're taking a picture of. Try things, move around a little bit, get creative, have some fun, and just take a bunch of photos and then review them and see which one, came out the best or which one you like, and then share that one. Don't just take a single picture and share it right away.
You only have a short, period of time to capture the moment. So try to capture multiple, like you said. So and then go back later in order to sift through. Whether later is 5 minutes after you take the photo or a day or two after you take the photo. And I think because folks have kind of become amateur photographers, so to speak, now because of using their mobile devices so much, they don't realize that the folks that have always taken the professional photographers who have taken some of the most famous photos out there take dozens and dozens, if not hundreds and thousands of photos over a period of time, even within a particular time frame for one particular subject, and then they sift through to find that one brilliant photo that everybody suddenly gravitates towards and thinks that was done, just they flipped the camera up and shot it. And so I think that's really where this sort of this take 3 photos of the same thing plays in well.
Yeah, good point. Another tip she shares is download a new app. And I like this one as well. So a lot of people, they get comfortable and they think, all right, well, I've got Instagram. I'm ready to do Instagram photos. But sometimes you can experiment a little bit and have fun with other apps that are in the App Store. If you just search for photography apps, there's literally thousands of apps, and they all do different things. You can apply different color filters. You can apply textures. You can apply text over top. There's, a lot of fun to be had out there. And you can certainly go overboard with this. I think you have to be careful not to dial up the quirkiness too much. But, if you're looking for a little bit of inspiration, go out and find a new app and play around with it and see if the results that you create are kind of what you were looking to share with your audience. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but at least it's keeping you excited. It's making it fun. And, I think that's important. I think if it only seems like work, you're not going to create good photos. If you're having fun with it and you're experimenting and you're getting excited, that's when you're going to create these images that really bring your audience together and get them excited about what you're sharing. Jumping around a little bit because I don't want to cover each one of these. We'll include a link to this in the show notes, so I definitely encourage you to read through the blog post, but I thought we just hit on a couple of the highlights. So last one I wanted to cover is find inspiration. So I think it's a good tip to recommend to people, go out and find some brands that you like their style and just follow them on Instagram. See the type of content that they're sharing. I know for myself, I follow Red Bull, and a big part of that is I just love the style of their photography. They're sharing things in a really interesting way, and it helps that they have crazy subject matter. They've got all these extreme athletes doing crazy things, but the angles that they get and the ways that they share their photos and the ways that they bring you into that experience, I think are really interesting. And, they're doing well with very varied styles of photos. So sometimes it's, a self photo of an athlete. Sometimes it's an athlete taking a picture of the fans that are around him. Sometimes it's, a picture of a bicycle or a skateboard or their tools of the trade. And so you can really get inspiration from all kinds of places. So I would say try to find a couple of accounts in your area, related to the types of content that you're going to be sharing. Follow those accounts and just get some inspiration. See the types of photos they're sharing, see what resonates with you, and then go out and try to recreate similar types of photos that you would want to share with your own followers. Because, I think that that's a great way of, again, kind of expanding your comfort level and finding new ways to create images and have a little fun with it. Any of these stand out as things that you wanted to talk about, Adam, in terms of tips for people that are looking to get a little more creative with their photography?
I mean, I think really the ones that you covered were the ones that stood out as being kind of having the most impact. There's the list is kind of geared towards folks in general to help them find inspiration in general with taking photos. And so some of them are a little bit more, say, personal than, say, professional, like finding a friend. So having somebody that is kind of driving you to, they're taking photos, they're participating. And so whether that translates into having multiple folks that are in charge of creating that visual content, and you guys are collaborating, you're doing it from different angles and different perspectives. Sometimes that can add a new kind of sense of fun and challenge and dynamic to what you produce.
All right. Well, we covered a lot today, but as always, we would love to hear from you. If you have any questions, if you want to suggest a topic, if you want to give feedback, or even if you just want to say hi, we would love to hear from you. Easiest way to do that would be via Twitter. Both Adam and I can be reached at SoLoMo Show, or if you'd like to reach myself directly, I'm available at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. You can also email us. We both check the email frequently. Our email is solomoshow@gmail.com. That's SOLOMO show @gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page, so of course you can join us there, as well as Google+, and we have a Pinterest account with a number of boards showing off interviews and other pieces of content that we've got on there. So please go over there and repin us to your heart's delight.
And all of the links that we discussed today, as well as the links that we just mentioned, can be found at the show notes, which are viewable either at solomoshow.com. Each of our episodes gets its own blog post, and you can check out the show notes there. Or if you look around inside of your podcast player, there should be an option to view show notes. And it's just a little way for us to give back to the listeners. You can click around, you can see the stories that we're talking about, dive a little deeper, form your own opinions, and, again, sometimes we can't cover everything, so we definitely encourage you to check that out because there's a lot of great content in the show notes. And with that, we will call this episode a wrap and hope to see you again next week for another great episode of The SoLoMo Show.
Thanks and take care.